Okay, so like, I wanted to try out my new Wonder Woman costume and the brand new wig and my brand new lighting setup. And I needed kind of like an excuse to do all of those things and like actually record because like all of that setup for like nothing is like a lot. So it's all super cute and we're gonna work on it a little bit in different ways, especially this wig. I want to take like the shine down a little bit because right now, and you know, give it a bit more volume because like right now it kind of looks like I'm going for like Roman Reigns and I'm not, but that's okay. um yes. So anyway, needed an excuse to do the new Wonder Woman outfit, to test out the lighting and everything. So I took some Wonder Woman questions on Twitter, and like, y'all are some audacious bitches because like pretty much all of these questions are like, some of them are in the form of a question, some of them aren't, but they're all like, here's my premise and I want you to run with it, right? So it's kind of like, I need to like, I'm being asked to like accept your premise and like accept your core like opinion in order to answer your questions, and it's like, it's big imposition. You ladies, I think pretty much everybody who um who ask questions that like I could tell what their pronouns are like she, her, hers. So like, audacious bitches is all I have to say about like most of y'all. Okay, well, we got a she, they. Good for you. I respect both because I should, because like, yeah, because like you're clearly putting the them in the mystery. Yeah. Remember, if you ever run into somebody who's like non-trans inclusive and they're like trying to tell you that Wonder Woman is non-trans inclusive, just like let them know that the island's not called She-Mysteria. It's Themyscira. 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 But of course, I am Diana of Transmyscira, right? And I have to accept the premise to answer this question. With what other Amazon do you think Diana had her first sexual encounter? So, like, this question is always going to be dicey because, like, under most circumstances, Diana is like, because here's the thing, like we'll come back to this in like another couple questions, but like the prismatic age like finally like really caught up with Wonder Woman in like 2015 because there have been like competing different origin stories for Diana since like the 40s or whatever, like when like William Moulton Marston and his multiple female partners like came up with the whole thing. There's been a couple of different origin stories because like there's a version where like Diana's made of clay, and there's another version where like she was born like the normal like heteronormative procreative way, and she like legit has a dad. And that was like the kind of like children's web series. They got canceled too soon because there was like social media drama or something, and that really sucked. But it was really cute. I think it was called like The Legend of Wonder Woman or something. Super super cute. Didn't get a lot of eyes on it in like, you know, standard comic circles, but like that one had like this kind of tragic romance for Hippolyta um, baked into it. So like Wonder Woman like had a dad, she just didn't grow up with him. And then of course there's like the version, the really fucking bad version that I hate, which is like the Brian Azzarello um, one, and that one is like, I don't know how they initially presented it, but like later on it was just like Zeus is her dad, and there are like male Themyscirans, like Amab Themyscirans, who they like sold into slavery to like Hephaestus or something, and it's just like just like a misogynist fantasy of like, look, women are terrible too when they have all women societies, and it's just kind of like, not sure that we needed men to come up with that version of the story, really. And of course, like the Meredith Finch run after that, just like went over a cliff. It was bad. It was bad. Bad times. And like the George Perez run had the version where like Hippolyta, like she was, um, well, all of the Amazons were reincarnated from like women who died violently by men, typically. And this was like the gods giving them another chance at life. It was like it's like really cute from like actually like a legitimate feminist perspective. And of course, like Karen Berger was the editor on that revamp, and it's kind of funny that it was just this little hot potato that people were like, I could revamp Wonder Woman, but I don't know if I want to, and they kind of had to like coax George Perez to do it, which is hilarious because like other than Teen Titans, now it's like the most famous thing that he ever did. So it's funny. We love that for him. But so that was the premise there, and like um, the woman that Hippolyta, I never know how to pronounce these fucking names. So like this is probably wrong, but whatever. Because I remember watching that terrible Wonder Woman movie, and I'm like, oh, is that how you say that? Like every time someone popped up, I was like, wow, I've only seen this in prose like any time ever. Um, yes. So like the woman that she was reincarnated from was like pregnant when she died. So they gave her a daughter because she just had this like whole thing where she was just like missing this daughter that she was supposed to have that she wasn't born with. So it's kind of like a little bit like unintentionally like extremely Freudian with the whole like lack and thing. Maybe that was Lacan. I know Lacan had the whole like lack thing, but it was kind of like the woman craves a baby. Was kind of like I think was part of like Freud's childhood development theories too. So you have all these versions, and the thing that like the vast majority of those clearly not the Azarello version, because the other thing was that like about the Azarello version is that the Amazons, the Themyscians, whatever you want to call them, the ladies, they would like go out and like seduce sailors like sirens and like basically like rape them into like procreating with them essentially, and like that's how like the Themyscirans bred. And this was like the new 52 version in like 2011 that had this origin. It wasn't like in the first issue. It's like stuff that was like rolling out as it went. So there were other Themysciran children, right? So like and like so apparently like Diana just didn't come from that whole like reverse Spartan type thing that was going on. Because of course it just came out that she was just like Zeus's daughter. She was just Zeus's daughter, and that's just so fucking dull and uninteresting in like a million different ways. So like that's a version where like you could kind of have that untroubled, right? And of course the other major version is like the Grant Morrison Wonder Woman Earth one, where like um, Hippolyta got a hold of like Hercules' sperm, and it's not like super like clear how she did that. Although there's some implications there, and I just don't want to describe that because I think it gets into like describing sexual assault. But so she like her being sexually assaulted, which I have to clarify because of what happened in the Azarello run, the really terrible one. That's awful. Yep, sorry. But yeah, so like she got a hold of it, but she didn't like bear Diana traditionally. She like kind of like I don't know. It's not or that's not even artificial insemination anyway. Like I guess she like birthed Diana out of like an artificial womb. Like it was alchemy. Like it was like tubes and beakers and things. I think was the image in Earth One Volume One that she did that. And of course, like the lie was that she was the clay baby, right? Which is the other most prominent version. Which I don't know actually if it actually goes back to Marston or not. I don't know where that originally came from. Um, and like the clay baby is also in like Wonder Woman True Amazon, the Jill Thompson graphic novel, but it's a little bit different. And like the gods like gift Diana, they bring the clay baby to life out of her mother's tears at her lack of ability to have a daughter. Um, so yeah, just wild different origin stories. But like, so the point there is that in like all of these scenarios, pretty much, except for like um, the new 52 Azarello version, because like I don't really know if like things got changed in Rebirth with like the Rucka run. The second Rucka run, I just don't know because I haven't read it because I don't care. Um, sorry, I just No, maybe someday when I'm bored, but I don't care. Um, but yeah, so I don't know if anything changed there, but like, so the whole point is that in every other version, Diana is the only child who grows up like a child on the island, and this is also true of the movie. Um, and so that like, so to answer the question of like, who did Diana have her first sexual experience with, assuming it's an Amazon, is that in every version you get like this like you end up with this like time traveler's wife slash Edward Cullen slash just kind of pederasty type scenario going on, because this is someone who would have been like an adult the entire time to Diana, and presuming that they were both adults, or like Diana was of like an appropriate age when that interaction happened, there would still be like this pretty weird power dynamic that's there that obviously doesn't happen in real life, um, but would still be weird, and uncomfy. And it's like pederasty is like definitely a thing that existed in antiquity, and it's a thing that men did. And like it's pretty fascinating because it's kind of like, I don't know if accuse is the right word, but it's definitely something that like people have tried to peg Sappho with. No pun intended. That the idea was that she must have been a school teacher and she must have like had like a position of power over like the women and like the girls that she was writing her poetry about, because of course, right? Because well, Socrates or Plato or whichever one of those like had his students and was like allegedly banging them or whatever, right? It's always like trying to create these like false equivalencies where it's like, well, if men did this, and if we accept that Sappho was a woman, then she must have done the same thing. And like that's what I'm talking about with the Azzarello run. It's always this like janky, like we have to prove that women do the same things that men do when left to their own devices, and it's kind of like, I don't know why you have to prove that. There are other ways to like grant women the agency of evil than like these super weird fantasies. So like the answer to my question is that, and I don't remember what Diana's actual like birth origin in this continuity is. I used to know, but it's been years. Um, so I'm gonna dodge the entire premise because, like I said, it just veers on pederasty to try to answer that honestly in any version other than the new 52, and I don't really know who Diana's kind of like peers as children would have been in that continuity because I haven't really closely read that run. But in the Bombshells continuity, when Diana is introduced, she has an interaction with Mira. So Mira lives underwater, right? Mira is Aquaman's love interest. She's like Atlantean, like I don't know. She's like an underwater person, right? I always want like Mira to kind of like be a mermaid, but she's not, and it's kind of weird to me that she's not because she always wears like green scaly stuff and she has red hair like Ariel, and it's like, so why aren't you just a mermaid? Um, it's just a weird hang up of mine. But they have this interaction that makes it clear that like they had a thing at some point, and they were more peers than anybody else was to Diana. And it's kind of like, I don't know that I've ever seen like a version of Diana that had like a history with Mira of any kind prior to joining the League. So it's really fucking cool that it was like, oh yeah, it's extremely obvious that if Wonder Woman lives on an island, that's like typically all girls, typically, and typically all like AFAB, you know, yeah, typically all like AFAB girls, and like Mira grew up under the water in the ocean. She's a girl. She's an AFAB girl. It's like it does nothing to the whole like Steve Trevor thing for those two to have a history, because Steve Trevor is like, because like also like interacting with Atlantean society is not the same thing as interacting with like people from like the normal world. And so of course like Bombshells demonstrated that because like Steve Trevor still exists in that continuity, right? Because it's World War II that kicks things off, right? In that continuity, and him crashing the same way that you would expect. So like it's so neat because it dances around everything and doesn't require any changes to any pre-existing continuity. But of course, anytime you're dealing with one of these weird little pocket side worlds, you can do whatever the fuck you want, right? You don't necessarily need Steve Trevor, but like if like all of the characters in your comic are like based on like titty statues who are designed around like nose cone art and like hyper patriotic American World War II shit, then yeah, you probably should keep Steve Trevor around. So point is, my answer to the question is actually Mira. So it's not an Atlantean, not sorry, like not an Amazon, but like an Atlantean, or she may not exactly be an Atlantean. She might be. There might be another word for like what house or place she's from, because like I read the YA Mira comic, and I've seen the movie, so like I know that there's like different houses and things. So it could be kind of like the whole like the Minotaur is called that because this is where he's from. It's not the name for like a bull person, right? So like and that came up. I think Ferdinand is his name. That came up in Rucka's first run when she had like this vegetarian like Minotaur cook, and people kept calling him Minotaur. And he's like, homie, it's only a Minotaur if you're from the region of France. Otherwise, it's sparkling bull person. Right, like that's kind of like that's what it is. That's what it was my understanding. So my answer is that Diana lost her virginity to Mira. That's my answer. I'm using the Bombshells continuity and just splattering it everywhere because it works the best. It's queer, right? Which is like what you asked me to give you, and like obviously what I want to give you. But also it does not have a flavor of pederasty or any weird like age dynamic problems with it. Okay, so Ashley, our sometimes producer. See again, premises. What is the best Wonder Woman story and why is it the true Amazon? So like again, like I said, like in 2015, roughly 2014, 2015, I think it was 2015. Was when like the idea of the prismatic age like truly took hold, because obviously there was like a succession of different origin stories and different versions of Wonder Woman, but they're always like in competition with each other. Nobody was ever there saying, let's take these as if they all happened, or like let's really examine the kind of diversity here, the way that Grant Morrison came into Batman and said, okay, it all happened, right? But there was always like the Batman thing with like, because you always knew there was like these different guys, like the Dark Knight Returns Batman, like you would bring him back for things, like Old Man Logan would come back for things, like they would. The Flash kind of like people always kind of say like the Flash sort of started the concept of the prismatic age when like the stories in which Barry and Wally, were two different plasters from two different places that could interact together. Like it was all ironically post Crisis on Infinite Earths, but so like Wonder Woman has always been like this weird dumb tug of war, and she's never been examined in that way. But then in like 2015, between 2015 and 2016, you had like the web first series I was talking about, the kids one, The Legend of Wonder Woman. The next one that you had was also Bombshells, right, which was another web first sort of pocket continuity. You had Greg Rucka's Rebirth run, which again, like I don't know that he unsettled or really changed much of anything with where Diana comes from. I never heard any like big revelations there that could be there. I don't know. Grant Morrison's Wonder Woman Earth One happened at the same time, and of course, like he really wanted. And he didn't go into it like Batman and say like all these different versions of Wonder Woman happened. She is both a child made of clay and like a real baby and the reincarnation of the unborn daughter of a murdered woman and all of these things. He didn't do that. He just went back to William Moulton Marston and tried to reconstruct something modern out of it and kind of like get back to brass tacks. But it was all of a flavor, and because Morrison was involved, it really had that tinge, and you could say, okay, now there's this panoply all at once that busts open the idea of there being a central Wonder Woman. Now we have multiple versions of Wonder Woman, and we can look at them all at the same time, break them down all at the same time. So, like, to me, the question of the best Wonder Woman story is not a question I'm going to answer. I'm not going to give you a straight answer to that, because the point is that they work so well in tandem and bring different things to the table in ways that actually, like, no other kind of revamps of like superhero origins that I'm aware of have ever actually accomplished, because like there's different versions of like Superman's like whole fucking origin, you know, as to like how many other Kryptonians are out there, whether he was born in a birthing matrix en route to Earth and never actually set foot on Krypton as anything other than a fetus, like the whole Mark Wade birthright or whatever the fuck it's called thing, which is like the Superman comic that came out alongside Batman Year One, right? Like typically these things like super don't change much, and like even like Frank Miller, like Batman Year One is an incredible story that did so much to change the way that we see Catwoman and Jim Gordon, but Martha Wayne's pearls were still Martha Wayne's pearls, right? Like it didn't shift the dynamic. It wasn't like we have to take something from Batman Year One and take something from somewhere else to create this more holistic version of it, right? But Morrison came around and he hyper focused on the bell. He's like, I'm gonna go down to the choice in Batman Year One to ring the bell in order to change the mythology of Batman. So it's a little bit of a different thing, right? And of course Scott Snyder goes back and he redoes the origin at the end of his run in Bloom and Super Heavy, when you know Bruce sees the little girl and he's like, "Fuck, I do need to get back to being Batman." It wasn't about his family. It wasn't about his parents. It was this little girl who tried to be a hero and took this thing, and she just mutated into this like monster thing that killed her. Fucking awful. But then you know it's Alfred pounding on the door and him using the machine again and again and again until he literally kills Bruce Wayne to become Batman again, right? So those were like on top, on top, on top. A little bit of a different thing in terms of like how the origin. It was kind of like going back and re-examining the same origin again and again. It wasn't like let's look at these different origins for Batman and add them all up, right? Um, but like with Wonder Woman, it is that way. That there's these different configurations, and like you wouldn't necessarily realize just how fucking much there is to play with in Wonder Woman's origin until you look at this whole history, and especially if you look at the, you know, the 2015 and 2016 um, comics that were coming out that were really reimagining that and giving you multiple versions all at the same time to say, wow, this is what the Perez version does. Wow, this is what the Morrison version does, right? And so like so there's a rationale for why you would pick um, True Amazon as your favorite. Like it's a huge deal because like it's a one woman show. Literally, it's Jill Thompson doing a Wonder Woman graphic novel, and she is an incredible you know artist and writer in her own right. She doesn't usually write a lot of stuff that I know of. Well, actually, that's not kind of not true. Like, you know, she's got Dead Boy Detective, Scary Godmother, this kind of stuff. But like, she's kind of still better known for like drawing and painting for like other people. I guess I don't know in terms of like major works. But there's kind of like an axiom that I believe in. Like I said it first as a joke because I realized there's a pattern there, but it's like it's actually kind of fundamentally true. Um, is that the best Wonder Woman comics are all made by people who worked on the Invisibles. Um, so far that means Phil Jimenez, who's already drawn and co-written a run with Joe Kelly in like 2000, 2001, I think. It's a long fucking time ago, but it was like after the Invisibles started. Actually, they're all post Invisibles. It's not that anybody did these Wonder Woman comics before they did the Invisibles. Of course, Grant Morrison with Earth 2, and Jill Thompson with Wonder Woman True Amazon, and of course, like Phil Jimenez is working on a Hippolyta comic with Kelly Sue DeConnick. So that's a neat little save, because then I don't have to challenge that principle when Kelly Sue DeConnick does a Wonder Woman comic, because she has Phil Jimenez drawing it. So like I don't have to adjust that theory at all, because if literally anybody else that I mean, obviously like if Steve Yowell or like Frank Whitley or Philip Bond drew it, then I would still be safe. But like point is that thank you Mama Shark for not, I don't know, going with Emma Rios. I mean, there's feel like, why the fuck don't you want Emma Rios to draw Wonder Woman? I do. It's just, point is that I have a reputation to save with that one. So it applies to that criteria, and it's also a woman doing her own thing. And it's also really dope because like the kind of curly hair, like the type of like texture and curliness of like Diana's hair, and kind of like her profile, and sort of like even in her mom, it's just like Jill Thompson is drawing herself. Like if you've ever seen a picture of Jill Thompson, you're just like, she's just drawing herself as Wonder Woman and Hippolyta to a certain degree in this comic. And so you can kind of like analyze that from that sort of like the way people analyze Hamlet of, him and his father, and him, evolving, from the boy of Act 1 to the man of Act 5, and you can look at that, like what is it that Jill Thompson is seeing in herself as Hippolyta, and what is she seeing in herself as Diana. And I think I've never actually like said that out loud or written it anywhere, but I've certainly maybe tweeted strayly at it. And it's like super cool because like Jill Thompson was also like the like manic pixie dream girl of like in the imaginations of like dudes in comics in the 90s. Because of course she drew the Invisibles, and like her run, like her contributions to the Ragged Robin character, like the way that she drew the Ragged Robin character in that period was basically like, if I understand this correctly, because it's been a little while since I've read any of like the conjecture about this, and like my understanding is that she's pretty chill with this, but it was like Morrison's like projection of her. So it's kind of like really like if Ramona Flowers was based on like a real person, and Brian Lee O'Malley had that person drawing Ramona Flowers instead of him drawing it himself. So like that's wild. Like that is wild. And again, if you go back and you look at Ragged Robin, because like everyone changes looks a lot throughout that whole series, and I think she shed the like Jill Thompson-ness not long after Thompson left the series and other artists came on. But like during the period of time that Jill Thompson was drawing Ragged Robin, like you can see the resemblances. Um, so like that really adds like a whole nother layer and texture to the whole, like the people who worked on the Invisibles do the best Wonder Woman, because she's kind of like, sort of back to this dynamic that you could argue is kind of like a self-insertion, but she's doing it herself instead of like with this weird fucking dynamic with Morrison. Allegedly, right? Like I don't know how true all of that is, but it's things that I've read about the Invisibles over the years that seem to visually check out when you look at the comic, and you look at them, and you take into account what Morrison was doing with like King Mob for himself, right? And that's the other thing, is that of course Morrison places himself in to various degrees of being literal into his own comics, right? Like his Animal Man, right? And of course, like King Mob is this idealized self version of himself that he was trying to manifest as he was creating this comic, and he wrote a lot about that in the letters pages. So Jill Thompson making it look, for all intents and purposes, like she is evoking parts of her own physicality in Wonder Woman is just such a neat way to take the kind of tools of one of her major collaborators who like has received so much fucking praise and just wild stories for doing this kind of stuff, and kind of like applying it in such a beautiful, you know, feminine and like intimate way is super unique, and it creates an amazing story at parties for people who read comics. So that's kind of the whole thing, and like it's just so gorgeously painted. And so, like I was talking about with Bombshells, like it's helpful, it's useful to keep Steve Trevor around in that version because of like how much it revolves around the war. But like in Wonder Woman, True Amazon, Diana gets herself exiled for fucking up and like accidentally getting her crush killed, which is like a brutal tragedy. But like the first couple times I read that comic, it did not even like strike me that Steve Trevor was just fucking nowhere to be seen. He does not appear. Which, I mean, I don't know that Steve Trevor represents baggage or that he's unnecessary. I mean, I get a little like when I watch, you know, the kids cartoon DC, um, what do you call it? Superhero girls, like the current one, the Lauren Faust one, because like anytime Steve Trevor shows up, Diana just loses her shit, and I'm like, no, I don't like Diana being helpless around a boy. Like I'm bisexual, like I have a limited interest in men, but I'm just like, no, not Diana. Why is she the one that does this? Why can't it be Babs, right, or something? I don't know. But I know why it has to be Diana, and it's funny. But I'm just like, you know, like I just get a little too arrogant. I'm like, no, like just make Diana perfect. Like just make her perfect. Like it's okay, just make her perfect. And I say this knowing that like Zatanna exists in that cartoon, and she's just like literally flawless. So like I'm just asking for way too much. But also like Wonder Woman True Amazon is queer and has like this gorgeous queer romance at the center of it, but it ends in like deadly tragedy. So it's like fuck. But that's also kind of like again why I'm saying like there is I don't like I'm not going to give you like one best. Like you can choose a favorite, but I'm not going to give you one best because like the year before, like 6 months before, or whatever the fuck it was, like when Wonder Woman Earth 1 came out, like Morrison like very explicitly restored Diana's queerness, um, with like Mala like being straight up her girlfriend, and I think it's pretty much the same character in Earth One and True Amazon. So I don't know. That could be a Marston character that they both used. I super don't know because there's some like really weedsy shit in the original comics that I just super don't know. Um, but they kind of look super similar. Like they kind of have, well, the the Jill Thompson version has more of like a Gabrielle from Xena vibe, and I think maybe that's also like very intentional because the other thing that Jill Thompson does, like there's one page where she just explicitly draws Diana dressed up like Lara Croft. Like it's not like super explicit, but you just kind of glance and you're like, wait, what's with like the shorts and the bodysuit? Like what is this? Did she just do this? So it's amazing because I mean, I don't know, maybe it means that Jill Thompson is like a closet Chanel Santini fan because like the only person I know of who's ever done both is her. She did it in porn. So that's like an extreme niche joke for you, but like it was just super fun to be like, wow, that's Diana, and she's apparently Tomb Raider for this page, which again, it's kind of like playing with all of that shit that you would expect the boys to play with in Boyaways, and Thompson's just accessing it because of course like she's also, and this is the funny thing about the Tomb Raider thing because it's just like God, I just like a bottle of wine, Jill Thompson, just let me like just ask you all of these like wacky invasive, well, semi-invasive, but just like super specific questions about all of this shit in Wonder Woman, True Amazon, because there's all of these things that could mean things, but that could be kind of coincidental. Because if you also go back to like Jill Thompson's um, segment on the Invisibles, and I just know it's so fucking well that I can make this connection in this exact second, is that she drew a sequence that she had to imitate Rob Liefeld for. That, like, you know, King Ma with these like big guns, he's like burn, and then she also had to like draw, like sign the page, like the panel with like the big like Todd McFarlane scroll type thing, because they were playing with the whole like macho action hero stuff. And obviously like late in the series when it's like Philip Bond and Phil Jimenez drawing, like Morrison gets deeper and more reflective into that. But like in that moment it was like, just draw a Rob Liefeld panel, just draw a Rob Liefeld panel, and it won't make much sense, but people will maybe pick up on this being satirical, and then we'll move forward. So it's kind of funny to reflect on the fact that Jill Thompson had drawn this parody of like Action Man, Rob Liefeld, like scratchy ass shit. You know, it's very much like if you like Beard Hunter in Morrison's Doom Patrol. It's very much like that, but it was just like one panel. So you kind of look back at that and be like, okay, so that was Jill Thompson riffing there for Morrison with Morrison. And when she comes in to do True Amazon, which is like it super changes the dynamics of what we look at as like a hero narrative, and like cast Diana as being this arrogant, spoiled child who fucks up and gets her crush killed and then gets exiled. So like she has a redemption story to go through. So I don't know. I think there's supposed to be a continuation of True Amazon. I don't know if and when it's going to happen. So like if there was a continuation of her story after leaving Themyscira, then it would be kind of like her going out in the world and becoming Wonder Woman to atone for it and to learn humility, which is like a whole other deal, because like it's fascinating that Wonder Woman is this female hero that doesn't have a personal tragedy tied to why she's Wonder Woman. Because like in some cases when she decides to go help Steve, her mom's like, no, you're exiled, right? But it's just like she doesn't have the tragic story that Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, whatever the fuck have. She just doesn't. And that's like a super important part of that character that like never really gets talked about, never really gets examined, that she is this triumphant, like she's very much like Steve Rogers kind of in that way, because like again he doesn't, like it's not a like a central tragedy that animates his life. It's that he super wanted to go out there and fuck up the Nazis, and so he made this huge personal sacrifice, you know, when it could have killed him, to take that serum and become Captain America, right? Like it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing, and it breaks the mold of how so much of superhero fiction operates, and that's why Steve Rogers, not Steve Trevor, has such a particular aura around him in film and comics and everything, right? And so Wonder Woman is a very similar concept, because like her mom is still alive. I mean, she dies occasionally in the comics, but like at the moment of origin, it's not my mom died, I have to avenge her, or like I fucked up and my mom died. Like there's no Uncle Ben, right? And so like one thing that Wonder Woman True Amazon does is it kind of really illuminates the fact that Wonder Woman never had that, that it's a different type of a story. So it's kind of weird because like I mean there could be a temptation for somebody somewhere to be, oh, like, you know, True Amazon is actually regressive because it just gives Diana the same type of tragic backstory as everybody else. And it's like, well, I mean, number one, because it's different, it draws attention to the fact that, like, she's never had an origin like this before, typically speaking, or at least not one that we talk about. So the dynamics are different. But it's allowed to live as its own story. It's not the Wonder Woman story. Not that, like, we have to realign everything we've ever thought about it. It's not parallax, right? It's nothing like that. It's its own story that's allowed to live as its own story. So, like, and that's also why the prismatic age thing is so important, because you don't look at Wonder Woman, True Amazon, or Earth One, or Bombshells, or The Legend of Wonder Woman as like the text, and you don't read it as just its own thing unless you've never read a Wonder Woman comic before. You're reading it knowing there's other versions, and knowing that this lives in tandem with those, and that this is creating that larger picture of Wonder Woman. So again, because of the prismatic age, because of just how much fucking phenomenal recent work there is no such thing as the best Wonder Woman story, but there's your rationale for defending that comic as the best, if you think so, or just the rationale for why it's your favorite. Which is awesome. Yes, okay. So, I think you still have a Halloween name or something going on here. So, from at Viva La Vienta, who's awesome. She says, and again, premises. So I don't have a question. I just want you to talk about the time Wonder Woman made friends with gorillas from Gorilla City and how rad it was. Actually, it was dumb and it sucked and I hate it. No. That's actually how Gail Simone's run started. And like, yeah, I don't know. It's probably a long thing to get into. But Gail Simone, like, it was the first time that like a woman had written Wonder Woman, like the main Wonder Woman title. No, sorry, it wasn't. Jesus Christ. This is why I have to like really think hard before I answer these questions. But it's just so there's this weird period of time for Wonder Woman. Actually, there's been a lot of weird periods of time, but one of the weird periods of time was after like Infinite Crisis was this whole 1 year later thing where like there was this time skip ahead after this whole shit went down, and all three of the main heroes had done something fucked up and had to just like walk away from it. So it was a world without Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman for an entire year, and other people stepped up to fill either their roles directly or similar ones. And that was being filled in by a weekly series called 52. But in the meantime, the main comics just jumped ahead a year and just kept going, and you kind of had to just sort of like pick up the backfill as they went to find out what exactly happened in that gap year. Wonder Woman is the only one that I really actually remember what the fuck she did and where she went. The other two I'm not really sure, but I know that like Bruce went on some kind of like quest with like a vacation quest backpacking journey thing with like I think maybe like Dick and Tim or something. I don't know. It was before Damien. But the whole thing with Wonder Woman was she murdered Maxwell Lord, which turned out to be a robot, blah, blah, blah. 24, Kiefer Sutherland, it's on shelf dust. So she gave up and abdicated being Wonder Woman for a while. And like Donna Troy kind of stepped up to try to be her. Cersei stepped up to be like the wild, like fucking Andrea Dworkin style, just extremely retaliatory, violent, like version of Wonder Woman, and that was kind of written by Alan Heinberg of the OC and Sex and the City, and like there was one issue every like 6 months that came out, and they just fucking dumped it and said, "Forget it, we can't do this." And then I can't remember if it was immediately after him or not, but like Jodi Picoult, the romance writer, got dumped into Wonder Woman, and if she had been writing her own thing from her own continuity, like as a standalone, it would have been fine. But like nobody really briefed her on like what Wonder Woman should be like, because she had been Agent Diana Prince again for a while in the normal movie, or sorry, the normal continuity, and like working for the DEO and this kind of stuff. So like the DC version of Shield. So she was like very much like embedded in civilian life for quite a while. But Picoult comes around and doesn't really get fully briefed on this, and so she has Diana not knowing how to pump gas or like what a latte is, and Nemesis is like, oh, I've got to show you how to live like a normal mortal, and so people just like jumped on it and sandbagged it because it was a romance novelist writing Wonder Woman, and she wasn't really up on where the continuity should be at the time. So it was like, stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. What the fuck? Like it just flashing the, light switch off and on really fast. And so, like, again, I don't remember the exact sequence, but I think it was Heinberg, Picot, Simone. Maybe? I don't know. There may have been some other little bit in there. But then, so like Gail Simone comes on, and she picks up after this random chaos of non-traditional writers, because Alan Heinberg at the time, like, this was before Young Avengers, so he was not known for being a comic book guy. And this was also the time that like Joss Whedon was writing the X-Men, and that was like once every 6 months. And like All Star Batman and Robin and the Boy One, so All Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder and All Star Superman were running like at around that same time. So like Frank Miller and Jim Lee putting out an issue every 6 months, Morrison Quilly putting out an issue every 6 months. It was a nightmare time for comics, just being late all the fucking time. And Wonder Woman just got just fucking sandbagged by this, because people wait 6 months for Frank Miller. They won't wait 6 months for Alan Heinberg or Jimmy Pickle. Even if Terry Dawson is drunk. Terry and Rachel Johnson are drunk. So fuck. So it's just all of this chaos, all of this nonsense, and then it's like, we're gonna give Wonder Woman to Gail Simone. And this was like a big come out for Simone, because of course she had like her real like big break on DC after doing like Simpsons comics and that shit was inheriting Birds of Prey from Chuck Dixon, which is a whole other story, right? So then it's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna give an established female comic book writer. So I don't remember if it actually went Picot to Simone or not, if there was somebody else in the middle. But so there was just like such a lack of faith in what DC was doing when they gave it to Simone. So it was a little bit of a backhanded compliment. It's like, we're finally getting to give you this thing, but we're gonna give it to you at a really shitty time. And like, if I remember correctly, like Simone really kind of glossed over that, and she's like, I'm just here to write Wonder Woman. Like, I don't want to really talk about the politics of what may or may not have happened in other, like, in previous issues. It's just like, I don't want, I just don't want to talk about the fact that some people see this as it getting dumped on me, instead of like it being like a, letting her jump on at like a good time for the character when she could let it soar. Um, but also like in the interviews, because this was, fuck, my entire life. This had to be 2006, 2007, I think, that Simone finally came on. I think that roughly makes sense. It was the late 2000s, but I don't think it could have been as late as 2010. Um, so like, she's doing interviews with like CBR and shit, and they're like asking her stuff about Diana's relationship to Man's World, and like, just this is kind of like, you've just discovered that there's a woman. It's very much like a, those like, what's it like to be a girl who writes comics, and you're like talking to a 40-year-old professional comic book writer, or however fucking old Simone was. Just it had that energy. It just fucking had that energy. And it was just, yeah, this basic shit about blah blah blah, like Man's World, and like the relations between the sexes, like men are from Mars, women from Venus, this kind of stuff. And so she's just like, I'm not. She's like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not. She's like, instead of doing, and this was the exact fucking quote from the interview, and she says, I'm not addressing that. The first issue starts with Diana punching a gorilla over a waterfall, and like, people were just like, yes, that specific answer is like a feminist victory for superhero comics. And it's just such a fucking stupid sentence. But it's not wrong. Like, the interpretations were not wrong, because it was like, I'm going to sidestep this tired old question that you're asking, because like at the time it wasn't being, you wouldn't even been in a place where it was just like, I think we can move on. Like, there wasn't going to be an answer from Simone about like the gender binary, or from anybody else. So it's kind of like, this was an era long before that Christopher Priest interview, where it's like, so you only acknowledge two genders, and the things just went to fucking hell. This was like, a decade before shit like that could even happen, right? So the artful way out of it was just like I'm not, I'm not tacking to that stuff. I'm just going to write a fun adventure story and see where it takes me. And so that's the thing. And so I don't remember what the exact thing has to do with these gorillas, because like I read the issue when it came out. I read, I think, like a third of Simone's run, like as it was coming out, and I don't remember why, but I tailed off from it. I'm bad at following comics monthly, and kind of caught up on most of it later. Um, but the whole thing, like, I think that the gorillas just kind of made like a shitty initial approach to Diana, and she's like, "Oh shit, gorillas from Gorilla City. This is usually like a bad thing." And it's like that's one of those things where you don't necessarily think about it deeply at the time, but it's just kind of like, because Gorilla Grodd is a Flash villain, right? And like, why does the Flash have a core villain who's like a talking gorilla who has like a city of like talking gorillas in Africa? I mean, there's like some difficult questions that need to be asked about the whole gorilla city concept. There just are. Because there's just some bad connotations going on. But then, like, when Wonder Woman gets involved with Gorilla City, things kind of get, like, more, like, weird and tragic. I know tragic is the word, but, like, weird and tangled and messy. Because, like, it's this, like, city, it's this society outside of, like, time and space where they, like, do their own thing and they're gorillas in the jungle. With like this gorilla dictator, and like Diana's from an island outside of time and space where they're all women. And I guess you could call like Themyscira a like benevolent dictatorship or something. It's pretty autocratic under Hippolyta, but it's just kind of like, what's going on here? There's like a parallel that just feels really bad. Because it's not like Wonder Woman and Black Panther where you're like, yeah, I see the parallels here with breakaway societies and, colonialism and misogyny and racism and like those fantasy structures, right? And like Florence Kasumba, hell yeah, the Dora Milaje, and she's like, she played a Dora Milaje and an Amazon. You're like, yeah, intertextuality, bitch. She fucking killed it. She like it just really made those parallels live. So congratulations to her for like doing something that a comic book never did, just by existing and just being cool and muscular and playing those roles really well. Like that's what a fucking gift. What just an absolute goddamn fucking gift to the mythology of comic books that Florence Kasumba embodies. She's like just fuck like amazing, just amazing that a real human being, like an actual real person, um, could accomplish that and could do that and make something that meaningful. Um, but so I think the whole thing is that they were like kind of like refugees from Gorilla City, or like they're on the wrong side of a coup attempt against Grodd or something. I think they kind of more needed her help, or she was just like, hey guys, why don't you just not be dickbags? And they're like, you know what, that feels like a great idea, but we can't go back to Gorilla City if we decide not to be dickbags. And so they like move into her apartment, and there's like this weird thing where like people just see these like gorillas through the window of her apartment because she's still living in normal human society and not really connecting with. Oh yeah, she's not really like connecting with like the home island because there was like Amazon's attack was a thing, and there was some wild shit about her mom like being brought back to life after being dead and like impersonated by Cersei. It was a garbage pile. There was bad stuff that got inherited there, bad stuff. But Simone got it back to like punching Nazis and like brought stuff back with like her mom and reestablished her mom and like intended to have her mom marry one of her like personal guards. But the story kind of felt like for a long time people were like, oh, Simone wanted to do this thing that was gay, and DC wouldn't let her do the gay thing. And she's kind of come back to sort of correct the record since then and say that it was just like she just ran out of time, and she was taken off the book before she was able to tell that story. Is I think the way that she framed it last time that I saw it come up. So that's interesting, and I guess that's kind of like a hyper condensed version of like Simone's whole run. Um, but yeah, it was just the whole episode was just her way of introducing this run with something fun and weird and low stakes and campy to kind of clear the air from all of the like super dark and like gloomy and like violent kind of edgelord shit that had been going on, because that Cersei stuff went places. Like the Dodsons drew a really fucking cool Cersei Wonder Woman with the purple hair and the crocodiles and the whole thing. It's just gorgeous. It's gorgeous. You want to dress up like it. You want to cosplay it. You want to draw your own fan art of it. It's really fucking cute. But I think it went through at least two different writers from when like that whole thing started up, when Wonder Woman picked up in 1 year later, and when it wrapped before Simone came on, it went to bad places. It went to just extremely bad places, and then it went to worse places when Amazon's attack happened, and yeah, bad times for everyone. Um, alrighty, Protex Blue. We've got one more question here. Let me see. She, her. Okay, I don't know. I'm just checking pronouns. It's just fun. I just want to honor whatever yours are. Okie dokie. So, gal, what are you asking me? You are asking most underrated runner story. I probably don't really know the answer to this because I haven't dug like deep into the weeds of Wonder Woman, but also like a lot of people just don't like. Very few people actually read Wonder Woman comics. Like extremely few. There are people who are like, yeah, I've read like the Rucka run, like the second one, or like maybe the first one, or I have like the Perez omnibus at home. I don't know. I mean, I could like I could almost just like with a straight face say the Jimenez run, which is kind of stupid because it has to be well known. It really it just does it does. Um, but it doesn't really get talked about that much, which is unfortunate because I mean like it was a weird time for the company, a weird time for comics, and it just kind of feels of a time of its own because like that super cool, gorgeous standout issue where like Lois just spends sorry where Lois spends the day interviewing Diana, because it's just like its touchstones are like when the View was new, and there is like almost a Carrie Bradshaw element to the way that Kelly and Jimenez write Lois in that version, which is kind of strange relative to how Lois typically like gets written in superhero comics, particularly in the 2000s. Um, she was like a hyper competent professional, whatever, and like in this one, she's kind of talking about how she's like over it, and like just like her dude is Superman, so it's like no big deal to be around Wonder Woman. And then she's like starstruck by Diana, and like she has this personal narrative that could be like Carrie narrating an episode of Sex and the City. And I'm pretty sure that this came out. I think this would have been after 1998. So I think Sex and the City was actually like a thing when Jimenez and Kelly were writing. But it just has that feel. It's very of that kind of time. And I guess the Perez run does some of that. Like the Perez and Potter run does a little bit like that with Diana doing media tours and this kind of stuff. And there could be references to 80s things that I just don't know, so they don't feel so idiosyncratic to the time period. But that's also probably one of the things that Jimenez and Kelly did that were like, okay, yeah, like Perez did this kind of thing. Where do we take that kind of thing now? Right? And they took it to the United Nations, the most incredible idea, the whole embassy. What a brilliant fucking idea that was. And like the Rucka interpretation of the embassy, I don't like, and I've written about it before. So yeah, it's kind of weird for me to like try to find like a Wonder Woman thing that's like what's the most underrated, because the answer is kind of like almost everything. Wonder Woman is underrated. Because even like finding people who actually like took the time to read Earth One and True Amazon is not necessarily as easy as you would like it to be. I'm like, oh, have you read Earth One? Or I mean, True Amazon yet? No, like I was like, and it took me almost a year to read the thing for complicated reasons, but like I was just yelling in the streets about like True Amazon, and like two people were like, yeah, I've read this. They're like, oh, should I check this out? I'm like, it came out like 6 months ago. What the fuck are you doing? Still fucking Thompson. She won Best Graphic Novel at the fucking Eisners for it. It's tempting to say the Christopher Moeller A League of One. And this is kind of what's funny, because like when the Wonder Woman movie came out, they had all these ads in like all of DC Comics that were like, these are the Wonder Woman comics to read, and it was just kind of like a shit mix of whatever they could was most prominent that they could pull out of the archives. So like the Hikatea, which I think was like actually out of print, because this is what I mean about everything Wonder Woman being underrated, is the Hikatea fell out of print. The Greg Rucka J.G. Jones comic with Wonder Woman's foot on Batman's face, the graphic novel that started Rucka's run that bridged the gap from Jimenez and Kelly to Rucka, fell out of print. What, like, what the absolute fuck? How does that happen? How does a comic that consequential, that had that much fucking heat behind the cover alone, fall out of print? Like, Flex Mantallo, like, you could not get Flex Mantallo because like DC won the lawsuit that was brought against them by Charles Atlas's, like, what do you call it when you're like dead and there's like people that still like do shit for you in your name? That like the Charles Atlas's heirs or like holding company or whatever sued them over Flex Mentallo, and they won. Like they're like, oh, this is derogatory. It's like, sorry that Charles Atlas like did a toxic masculinity, and it upsets you that like Morrison and Quigley pointed out the toxic masculinity is a thing by using a parody of Charles Atlas. But like, so DC won the case, but they were like, we just don't want to provoke this any further, so we're just taking the comic out of print, even though we won the lawsuit. And so like, I read Flex Mentallo as like illegal scams at first, and like it was just like the biggest novelty in the world when I finally bought a copy. So it's like, yeah, like Flex Mentallo is this incredible, like super important comic that like obviously like kind of like everybody knows what Flex Mentallo is because of like the Doom Patrol TV show, which is also extremely fucking surreal to say. Um, that there's like a Doom Patrol TV show and it's mostly based on the Grant Morrison run. Who would have thought that could happen? But like there was reasons, right? There were reasons for why you couldn't get Flex Mentallo. And it's just like you like the filth has never fallen out of print. Like Grant Morrison's most extremely fucked up, idiosyncratic, esoteric comic that is not nice to look at any point. It's not. Like, God bless like Gary Erskine and I think Glenn Fabry I think Glenn Fabry worked on it too, but I know that Gary Erskine definitely did. But like, God bless those guys and their brilliant detail and realism, but like nothing in that comic is nice to look at, and it's just like it's a mess. Like that fucking. I mean, it's a great comic, but it's just so ugly. It's just such an awful experience to read that fucking comic because it's supposed to be an awful experience to read that comic, but like, it's never fallen out of print. You've always been able to get a trade of the filth, and it's just like, how did the Hikatea fall out of print? Because that was the thing. Like, I think this was like 2012, 2013, 2014, something like that. Maybe even 2015. It may have actually been 2015, or yeah. And there were like conversations about Wonder Woman, and I think a lot of it was kind of, it was before the movie came out anyway, but it was just kind of conversations around like the Azzarello run and stuff like this, and what are the good ones, what are the bad ones, what are the iconic Wonder Woman stories. And like I started noticing a lot of people I knew hadn't read the Hikatea, and like I think I got it at the library, like I got it from the library, like when I first heard about it, because it was also like it was a graphic novel. It never saw a single issue of print that as far as I know. And so I was like, oh man, yeah, like because I remember when the cover came out and everyone's like, this is fucking crazy. And so it just had this indelible impact at the time in that exact moment that it first appeared, and it fell out of print because that's how much DC gave a shit about Wonder Woman in the mid 2000s, I guess. And then of course like I think like the first way that it came back into print was actually the Rucka omnibus. When like the movie meant it was like, oh shit, now we have to collect so much of this Wonder Woman stuff because some people are actually going to want to read a Wonder Woman comic after this movie comes out, and like we've made so many Wonder Woman comics inaccessible because we haven't given a fuck about one of our most important characters for like 30 years. So the Hikatea kind of got rushed into back into print. I think there was a time period where you had to get like the Rucka, like the Rucka omnibus just to get a copy of the Hikatea. I don't know if like, and there it came out again digitally at some point. So I don't know if you can just walk in and get the Hikatea on its own now. It may still be the case that you can only get it in the omnibus. They didn't do its own run, but it's like you saw those list of comics that was like, these are the Wonder Woman comics to read before the movie comes out. And I think maybe that was one of the things. I was like, why isn't the Hikatea here? And someone was like, well, the only way to get the Hikatea is to buy the Greg Rucka omnibus, which is so fucking stupid because it's a jumping on point for anything that you could want a jumping on point to be. It should always be available on its own. But then but it was just kind of like there was like an old like George Perez one, which like the Perez run is great. It is. I have read it now, but I was just kind of like, compared to what you see when a new Batman movie comes out, it's like we have like another anniversary edition of Year One, and The Dark Knight Returns, and here's some Scott Snyder and here's some Grant Morrison. You know what I mean? Like there's just like a library. There's like a library, and you're looking at the Wonder Woman one, and it's like, here's some old George Perez stuff. Here's the Terry Dodson trade, like, which is called Who is Wonder Woman, and I'm like, why is this what you're pushing people to read? I think there was a Gail Simone one in there. Earth One was there, and I'm just like, God, I love Earth One, but again, like, what a fucking weird, like, just extremely weird batch of comics you're telling people to read, because like this wasn't coalescing yet, and like True Amazon wasn't out yet. G. Willow Wilson hadn't done Wonder Woman yet. Mariko Tamaki hadn't done Wonder Woman yet. James Robinson hadn't done Wonder Woman yet. But then there was the one they put in there, which is what I've been leading up to, was Christopher Muller's A League of One, which again I read from the library. I'm pretty sure the first time I read it. And this was the time I was like, I don't know about Wonder Woman, because like again, DC has never been great at making a strong case for Wonder Woman, and there have been a lot of problems with a lot of Wonder Woman comics and a lot of the ways that Wonder Woman gets framed. It's been a long journey for me with Wonder Woman. And like, if you had told me 10 years ago that I would be doing this, that would have been like, fuck off. like cross-dressing, sure, maybe, but like Wonder Woman, I don't know about that. Obviously, I'm not cross-dressing, but like 10 years ago, I was like maybe out, probably not. So you understand what I'm saying. But like, it was a long journey. But like Christopher Nolan is probably best known in comics for his gorgeous paintings that he did for Lucifer, for Mike Carey's Lucifer run, and so he painted a holographic novel, whole Wonder Woman graphic novel, and this was like shortly after Grant Morrison's JLA run. So the whole idea of like Batman taking down the entire Justice League was still like a thing that had a lot of like social currency in comics. Like we don't tell those stories anymore, thankfully, but it was like the whole like White Martian thing in Morrison's run, and then Tower of Babel, which I don't even know if like Morrison actually wrote that story. Maybe Mark Waid did. I don't know, but it was the whole thing where like Batman's plans to beat the Justice League, to beat up his best friends in case they turn on him, got stolen by Ra's al Ghul, and Ra's al Ghul takes down the Justice League using Batman's plans to take them out. And so it just became this thing that if Batman had to, he could take out the entire Justice League. And that led to like stories like Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe for whatever fucking reason. But the whole time period of Batman being able to take anybody on because he can come up with a plan had like huge social currency at the time. And of course, like Mark Millar like basically plagiarized. I don't know, maybe Morrison said okay or whatever, but he basically plagiarized the whole White Martian thing with like the Authority. So it was just and Midnighter, and so it just gets done again and again and again. And of course, in the Mark Millar version, like he is fighting a literal evil version of the Authority, so he does actually take down equivalent versions of all of his friends, and he's super cool about it, right? It's a nightmare. Mark Millar's Authority run is a nightmare. So JLA League of One is like a weird fossil in that sense because the entire story is that Diana gets a prophecy that this dragon is going to fight the Justice League and it's going to fucking kill them all. Or it's going to kill whoever fights it, I think is kind of exactly what it says. And so she's like, well, I've got to fight this dragon on my own because I don't want it to kill anybody else. It's one of those prophecies like in Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, no weapon forged by man, I am no man, these kinds of things, right? Was it Neville? Was it Harry? Right. So Diana's like, shit, this means I have to fight it alone, but I can't tell anybody why I have to fight it alone. So she gets it into her head that she has to clean the rest of the Justice League's clock. She has to beat the shit out of the rest of the Justice League so that they can't fight the dragon. So she's going to take it out on her own and kind of Gandalf it, right? Is the plan, I guess. And I can't remember exactly how it resolves itself, but Diana does successfully beat back the rest of the league. And then she fights the dragon, and then you kind of find out that there's an issue with the prophecy, and so she doesn't necessarily have to do everything on her own. And like the moral of the story is like, Diana, you don't have to do everything all by yourself. Like it's okay to have help. But like the comic also like illustrates the fact that Diana did wash the entire Justice League. So it was kind of like anything Batman can do, I can do better. So it was kind of like there was this weird current because I think League of One is probably again like probably like early 2000s. I don't know when it first came out because I just read it in trade. It's a graphic novel, but it's just like I picked it up from the library. I didn't get it on release. I didn't hear about it until after it came out, but it just kind of had that same vibe as the Hikatea cover of like Diana's boot on Bruce's face. It was like we're gonna like give Diana this like nutty come up. So like again, like it got resurrected and it got a push when the movie came out. So like I don't know how underrated a League of One is because it's also one of those things that like when Wizard magazine still existed, they would be like, ooh, things you don't know about Wonder Woman, or like wacky stuff about Wonder Woman, and stuff that you would see on like clickbait posts now, like, ooh, check out this time that Wonder Woman beat up the. So like or like Scans Daily would be like, check out this Wonder Woman shit. So it's kind of one of those things that kind of like it has a reputation. It lives on in like clips and like scans, but it's kind of like how many people have actually read the thing? Like you know its reputation, but have you read it? I don't know, right? So like that would definitely be like an underrated one. I mean, it's a fun read and it's just beautifully painted, but I don't know that you're gonna come away with it from it being like, holy shit. It's not really gonna change anything you think about Wonder Woman. Not in 2020 anyway. In 2010 and when it came out, it might have, but it's yeah, underrated. I think there was also the sensational comics with Wonder Woman, which I think was actually the name of like a super old Wonder Woman run, but they revived it as digital comics, and they just had like a wild list of people who ran through it. Like Alex DeCampi wrote one. I don't remember who drew it for her. Noelle Stevenson drew a Wonder Woman one with I want to say Brendan Fletcher wrote it. It was either Brendan Fletcher or James Tinian, but I want to say that it was Brendan Fletcher. And it's like Noelle Stevenson drawing Wonder Woman, which just felt like holy shit at the time, because it was around the same time that Noelle wrote the story for the Thor annual when Jane Foster was Thor, and it was drawn by Marguerite Sauvage, and it was just beautiful and fun and cute, and there was some like pretty gay stuff going on in little bits because she had to kiss this like elf queen to like gently wake her up so that she didn't piss her off, and it was extremely cute, and it was just like, you know, dwarves and shit like being bros to like Jane and being like, oh, you can't do things that the guys do, and she goes out and does them, but it's like Noelle Stevenson writing, so there's like a lot of like really cute charm to it that doesn't make it be like I can do anything a boy can do, like just the cleverness of how Stevenson's version of Jane approaches those situations is what's really cute in it. Like it's what separates it and what makes it so fun. And I haven't actually read the Wonder Woman story that Stevenson drew, but again, I think it was called Sensation Comics. With Wonder Woman or something like that, and it was a digital first, and it actually became like a focal point of Eddie Braganza's history being like redisclosed and starting the wave that just kept going until he finally was gone. That was the time, like, that was like, there was that Tumblr post that was like, because Sensation Comics wasn't, because Wonder Woman was under the Justice League, or no, ah, fuck, because there was a shuffling around Braganza, but I think at the time Wonder Woman was under the Superman group, which tells you a lot about the priorities for Wonder Woman, that she was under the Superman group. That tells you a lot. And the Superman group editor was Eddie Braganza. And so one of the points of contention was that like you could have great Wonder Woman stories like Sensational Stories of Wonder Woman or whatever it was called, but like it had to get done outside of Wonder Woman's actual home because Eddie Braganza was running Wonder Woman's actual home. Because either in the wake of the Braganza stuff, before they actually got rid of him, they moved Wonder Woman to the Justice League thing, or he was running Justice League when, or like that's just like Wonder Woman was under Justice League, but I think she was under Superman at one point. Because you get weird editorial shuffles, but the point is that also that there was no Wonder Woman group editor because there was maybe one Wonder Woman book, right? So she's either under Superman or Justice League, and like I don't know how that's organized now, but it's just like the Wonder Woman books right now are like Wonder Woman and Justice League Dark, so she's probably still under the Justice League banner. And of course, when Greg Rucka came on to write Wonder Woman the second time, he would not do it under Braganza, so they had to move the Wonder Woman book to a different group. I think maybe it was Justice League because Starfire was a Braganza book when Connor and Palmiotti had it, but anyway, so like that's another point that you can go to for Wonder Woman that has an extremely weird history behind it. I don't know if it ever saw like a print collection, but it definitely should still exist on Comixology. And there was also like within that Sensation Comics, one of the last ones under that run. And it's always funny these things like happen at the end of runs. They had Diana officiating a lesbian wedding, and this was like pre-Pulse. This was probably maybe even still Obama at this point. Could have been 2015, could have been 2016. Probably wasn't 2016. So like there's little things there where like people tried stuff with Wonder Woman. Um, God, like another. I mean, like Harley Quinn is an underrated Wonder Woman comic. I mean, there's the Wonder Woman in Harley's Little Black Book, which is like a comic that's all about Harley wanting to bang Wonder Woman. Like that's the entire plot, and it's also where you find out that Harley was a huge Wonder Woman fan as a kid. She just has a completely different moral compass than what you like the typical depiction of Wonder Woman is. And that was also kind of a vehicle for people to kind of understand that like Connor and Palmiotti through like Harley's psychiatric practice like with the old folks home was very much informed by like William Moulton Marston and like all of like the bondage dynamics and these kinds of things. They really put a lot of like the Marston stuff and like kind of Wilhelm Reich type stuff and psychoanalytic stuff. Um, Pulled it from Marston's Wonder Woman, and put it in a contemporary, alternative therapy, social justice frame. So like, there's a lot of like old Wonder Woman DNA in Connor and Palmiotti's um, Harley Quinn run, which is just an incredible thing to talk about. But it's definitely there, and like like the arc where Harley goes to Los Angeles is one of the places where you can really see it in practice the most because like Harley hits on a woman that she thinks is Wonder Woman that turns out to just be like a sex worker who's dressed up as Wonder Woman. So it's not even like because at first it's like the reader knows it's not Diana, but they think it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's the people, it's like those dudes that dress up as the heroes to get to take pictures with them and you pay them and whatever, right? Like you think it's going to be that, but the reveal is that she's not, that she's a sex worker and she's propositioning her, and she thinks like that Harley is propositioning her, and then whoever it is that Harley's with kind of pulls her away. But like the resolution is that when Harley finds out, she's like, oh, she's like, this isn't what I thought it was, but this is better, or like not, or it's like, or like this is cool too. Like I still, oh, like I'll still bang her even if she's not Diana, and I'm gonna have to pay her. Like that's fine. Was the whole thing. But at the end of that arc, when she like gets the girl back that they have to get back, who it was like a whole fake kidnapping kind of a story, but like sort of like Harley's view of sort of like this, kind of therapeutic model and kind of almost like restorative justice approach to how she was going to handle it was like this hilarious, outlandish parody of William Moulton Marston's kind of thing, like the whole bondage therapy type stuff that you would see Diana engaging in those old comics, and like the scene has Harley topless being covered by ferns, and she refuses to put clothes back on to finish this mediation between the girl and her family, and it's bonkers, but like the whole point is that it is a reconstruction of the William Moulton Marston Wonder Woman comics, just as much as Wonder Woman Earth One is. So like I guess Harley Quinn is an underrated Wonder Woman comic. Trying to think of any others, because again I haven't read too far outside the lines with Wonder Woman, because like there isn't a lot of stuff that you can even read outside the lines. Like if you went into the 60s or the 70s and you pulled out like a particular issue um, that like nobody talks about anymore, then like I guess that's one thing, but it would still just be like under the Wonder Woman banner, right? Like it's not like you're gonna pull out a Batman miniseries that like nobody remembers even existed because there's just been like millions of them, right? Or like how the graphic novel that sort of laid the foundation for Damian Wayne to appear um, was just kind of like this weird side item that nobody knew, that nobody remembered for like a long long time, or nobody like looked up when they were reading old stuff. Son of I don't remember what it's called, but yeah, so I guess that's the closest I can come to really kind of thinking about like underrated Wonder Woman comics, because again, like kind of everything Wonder Woman is underrated. The only two things that I can think of with Wonder Woman that like probably aren't classified, like you can't make an argument for them being underrated, is number one the Azzarello. Well, the Azzarello and Finch runs, because they're just that bad that like you just can't underrate them. They're just bad. They're bad. They're not good comics. You shouldn't read them. It's probably also true the James Robinson run, but I don't know. Like I don't read comics by disgusting transphobes who give like mealy mouthed fake apologies to Glad for shit that they humiliated me with. I just and like the George Perez run, because I mean I think it's gotten its genuine due. It's like the one Wonder Woman thing you can say got its genuine due. I mean there may still actually be some space to say that Gail Simone's run was underrated. I don't know. Maybe you can't. Maybe it gets the respect that it deserves. But I think those are kind of like the key ones. The Sensation comics with Wonder Woman, like the digital stuff. I think Bombshells like is also like extremely highly visible. I don't think I need to point anybody in the direction of that doesn't already know that it exists. So yeah, I think that like Christopher Muller's A League of One, Sensation Comics, Harley's Little Black Book. I think people know about it, but they don't actually read it because Harley is extremely polarizing, and that was like a special that I think those might have cost like $5 or $6 each, and like you kind of have to be pretty dedicated to want to buy those. But like that series also, like the Wonder Woman one was actually drawn, like the whole fucking thing was drawn by Amanda Connor, who was not really doing sequentials at that time. She was pretty much just a writer and doing covers on Harley Quinn. So it was really special for her to actually come in and do a full issue of Harley herself. And then like later on they had Simon Bisley and Joseph Michael Linsner. I can't remember who all the other artists were, like Chad Hardin. Not Chad Hardin, sorry, the other one. John Timms also did one of the Harley's Little Black Book issues, and he was a regular Harley artist, but like most of them were artists that you don't really see doing a lot of sequentials these days. Like Linsner did the Zatanna one, for example. But as artists you don't see doing sequentials who seems like they had pretty generous deadlines to do these on, so they're all really high quality shit. So like it's five, like your $5 is a lot for a single issue of a comic relative to what the market was then and what the market is now. But It's probably cheaper than that now on Comixology, and it's like definitely worth a read. The Wonder Woman one is really funny. Because like, why wouldn't you want to read a comic that's entirely about Harley Quinn talking about how much she loves Wonder Woman, how much she wants to have sex with Wonder Woman, and like just the fact that like this was also at a time when Harley and Diana were DC's most visible and popular female characters. And like Harley was the most visible and the most popular. She was inarguably the number one female character at DC. And it's kind of like before the rise of Harley Quinn, you'd be kind of like, yeah, isn't Wonder Woman always pretty much one of the one number one or number two most popular female characters at DC? And it's like sometimes actually there's only one most popular female character at DC, and that's Catwoman because she's the only one who like has like an ongoing solo comic that like people know exists and actually read. And that was called the 1990s. Um, so it is kind of significant to say that they were the two most visible and popular at the time. Catwoman was not having the greatest time. um, in that moment, hopefully she'll get another bump up because that's like how that shit works. But it's just so fascinating because it really just kind of brought into play that like the whole thing wasn't just that Harley wanted Diana to bang her. Harley wanted Diana to top her, to dom her. Like this was like Wonder Woman is a BDSM thing. Harley, like, and that's a thing. It's like the most popular, most visible dominatrix in comics, and the most popular invisible sub in comics as far as women are concerned, right? And so it's kind of like, well, yes, there should be a huge natural sexual chemistry between Harley and Diana because they are the dom and sub, the archetypal dom and sub of like this whole thing. But of course, they've been trying to like hide and get rid of the whole like Wonder Woman is a dom kind of thing and all of the bondage stuff, and like that version of Diana that's there is kind of like, I see what you're trying to do here, but like that's not what I do. And so like it's Harley, trying to bring out this older version of Wonder Woman in this newer version of Wonder Woman. And of course, like obviously the comic ends with like Diana having Harley over her shoulder, just like the Marston, like an equivalent Marston comic would. But like with the Marston comic, there's like BDSM coming, like they're gonna bang. It's Sunstone time, right? Whereas like you kind of know that's not gonna happen in this comic. So it really kind of was squaring the circle about Harley having been introduced in this awful, horrible, abusive relationship that was kind of like played for laughs and like stupidly romanticized in the 90s when she first popped up in a kids cartoon. And then slowly became framed as a survivor and like a legitimate practitioner of BDSM and an actual sub. And like three-quarters of that work was done by Connor and Palmiotti, right? And so of course what you want to bring that back around to is the rich history of like BDSM dynamics in DC Comics, and there's plenty in Marvel Comics too. There's a man called Chris Claremont that you may have heard of before, um, but they kind of square the circle there by being like, well, Diana's the traditional dom, Harley's the traditional sub, and like they are so personality wise just so hilariously different that you don't think of necessarily like them like writing fanfic about them, but since then it's become extremely obvious that this is the thing, and that this is a thing and it should be a thing, and it's a thing that people ship, and it's amazing, and it's one of those little things that I work very hard to tug at and pull at and play at in my own comics because I have maybe drawn myself as Harley Quinn in a scenario like that with somebody else as Wonder Woman, who is notable for having portrayed Wonder Woman in pornography. I have maybe done that before. So it's things like that that they can at least point to and be like, yeah, this is a part of the whole thing. And like further along the line in Harley's little black book, because like typically most of these scenarios, most of the characters, like the Neil Adams one is of course like a redone version of like Superman versus Muhammad Ali, so it's not as much of a sex thing as the rest of them are. Um, but like the one that John Timms draws is the Hal Jordan one, and it's really funny because all of the ones that are okay, all the ones that are overtly sexual, except for two, are Harley pursuing a situation where she wants to be in a submissive dynamic. And she's very, very clear, very explicit about it. When she wants to fool around with Zatanna, Wonder Woman, all of these characters, she wants to be in a submissive position. The two that she does not do that with are Hal Jordan and Lobo. And the Lobo one is a dynamic all of its own, um, and is pretty funny. And it's more of like kind of an intense rivalry that turns sexual than like that kind of sorting. But of course, the Hal Jordan one is the only time that Harley wants to top, and so I can't remember what ring she gets a hold of. She gets a hold of a ring, and so it's her going mad with power with one of these lantern rings. And of course, and she's just being incredibly lewd to Hal Jordan, talking about the things that she wants to do to him and how she wants to dominate him. And like, if you know anything about the history of Hal Jordan, you know that like Carol Ferris as Star Sapphire is like in the pantheon of like comic book dominatrixes, and like Diana's like a really kind of like nice therapeutic dom. Carol Ferris, I almost said Danvers, because like they are extremely similar characters in some ways, but Carol Ferris as Star Sapphire is more like the Emma Frost, Madeline Pryor end of the spectrum than Wonder Woman when we're talking about comic book doms. So there's all kinds of covers, like like I'm talking about the Hikateo with Wonder Woman's foot on Batman's face. There's all kinds of like super eroticized shit of like that, of like Carol Ferris with like her like super eroticized like BDSM gear as Star Sapphire with like her foot on Hal Jordan's face, and it's like a pure BDSM fantasy, right? And so they're evoking that because like Harley Quinn, she's the character who can say the unsayable and do the unthinkable. Like she as like an anti-hero and a wacky character and someone that like has been underrated by even just like the company for the entire time that she's existed, has that freedom to do things. So in Harley Quinn's little black book, um, Connor and Palmiotti can really like play with that stuff and kind of like use Harley to bring out these elements of like the history of DC Comics that doesn't really get played with too much, that they don't really come out and like acknowledge that things were like this ridiculously horny and had this particular BDSM dynamic on them. Um, and so Harley is like extremely useful as a vessel for that kind of stuff. Um, and that's why that whole series is a really fun little examination of these kinds of sexual dynamics that have always been in superhero comics but have kind of like been drained out of it, so it's like all violence and no sex sort of stuff, which is like it's gross, it's weird. Like let's have the sex stuff. If comics are for adults, then like can we please have the sex stuff and just be like intelligent about it and like have more than one kind of gendered perspective about it, that would be nice. So that's all the Wonder Woman questions that I got, and those are some broad answers about them that also kind of probably give you just about everything that I think about Wonder Woman along the way. So hopefully you had fun. That was fun. It was fun for me. The only part of this that wasn't fun was getting these nails stuck down, but all of the rest was. So like, bye.